Hello, everybody, and welcome to Lopes on Movies. My name is Joey Lopes, and today I am joined by Connor.
Hey, Joey, Connor Lopes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And Kyle.
What?
Oh, wait, we're not joined by Kyle today.
I thought you were pulling a fast one on me, Joey.
No, yeah, it would have been cool, but unfortunately, this is we're a man short today, so we'll see how that goes. But I'm excited because I think we're going to talk about something that is, a little bit different today. So let me give some background here. We are all locked down, as you know. We are still living in a coronavirus world. We're not going anywhere, not going to the movies, and even though we've talked about it a little bit in the past about how some movie studios are, putting their first release movies on video on demand as opposed to in theaters because nobody can go to theaters, it doesn't seem to have been happening a lot lately since that initial that initial burst of you had The Invisible Man, The Hunt, and everything coming out on video on demand. But now it's pretty much like radio silence. I don't think movie studios kind of know what they're doing. So all we can do is kind of look through the backlog. Like, what are movies that we can watch at home? And obviously there's tons of movies from the past, but the thing that we decided is to maybe do some episodes on movies that we are actually really passionate about and movies that we really love, and just kind of give some perspective on the things that we think really matter and are really great. So we are going to talk about today probably one of, if not my favorite filmmaker, one of my favorite filmmakers of all time, Sergio Leone, and his 1984 film Once Upon a Time in America. So as usual, I will give just a brief synopsis of this movie. A former Prohibition-era Jewish gangster returns to the Lower East Side of Manhattan over 30 years later, where he once again must confront the ghosts and regrets of his old life. It was directed by Sergio Leone in 1984, and it stars many of the great actors of that era, including Robert De Niro and James Woods in the lead roles. So, Connor.
Yeah.
I have talked about this movie before with you, I'm sure, and I bring it up to people a lot as something that's it's one of those movies, one of those special movies that I feel like you need to let people know about. So I was excited to show this to you for the first time. So give me a little bit of what went through your head watching this epic for the first time.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So I'm familiar with Sergio Leone's Western films, and this is one that's obviously not a Western, but man, this is probably the emotional ride that this film takes you on is something unlike anything I've ever seen. It really challenges the audience to think about relationships and friendship and lust and greed and what all those things mean in different contexts of things. Mm-hmm. You get so many different perspectives that you think just when something is going to be so irredeemable, you realize that there's hours left to go. Mm-hmm. And there's so much more story going on here, and the shot composition is amazing, mixed in perfectly woven in is the Ennio Morricone soundtrack, which is just iconic. I think it might be the best soundtrack I've ever heard, actually. It's just amazing. And there's certain things that you said also that after we watched it yesterday that you've seen it countless times, I guess.
Many times.
I mean, I don't know how many times you've seen it, but it doesn't get old, and I can totally understand why, because it's just, this is what film was supposed to be in its purest form, to the top of its what it's meant to do. Mm-hmm. It's like you said, you almost compared it to listening to a great piece of music, where it's great every time you listen to it. You'll listen to that song that you love again and again, and this is something similar. You get just so much out of it. And we'll go into some more obviously soon, but I think maybe a little context of this movie, and it's got a very interesting history too.
It does have a very interesting history, and I think in order to talk about Once Upon a Time in America, you have to talk about the director of Once Upon a Time in America, because Sergio Leone he's well known as one of the most influential filmmakers of all time, but I think one of the interesting things is I don't really feel like there's any filmmakers that have quite done the same thing that he's done. I think like you have filmmakers that were very obviously influenced by him, especially like guys like Quentin Tarantino, who have even like lifted music from Leone's movies to put in his movies, like one to one, just because he's in love with Leone that much. But I feel like Sergio Leone remains kind of a unique figure, and even though he only directed 6 movies, his influence and just the amount that he accomplished with those movies is really really remarkable to me. So obviously Sergio Leone is most well known for his westerns, and in particular the famous Dollars trilogy. So that's A Fistful of Dollars, For a Few Dollars More, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which are of course the 3 films that really gave Clint Eastwood his big movie star bump, starring as the man with no name. As I said, Sergio Leone only directed 6 of his own movies, and 5 of them are westerns. After the final film of the Dollars trilogy, he did a movie called Once Upon a Time in the West, and right after that, he did a movie with a very strange title, that is a very strange movie, called Duck, You Sucker. And then his final film was this one, Once Upon a Time in America, which is a gangster movie epic and one of his biggest passion projects. So he died only 5 years after Once Upon a Time in America came out, and it was the last movie he ever directed. So when people ask me my favorite movie, my first thought is usually Once Upon a Time in the West. That's the first thing that comes to mind. And when people ask me a favorite director, I definitely have a hard time not saying Sergio Leone, just because of how much, to me, Leone's movies represent the very, very best of what movies can be as an art form. So the thing that really makes a Leone movie special is he used to call his movies fairy tales for adults, right? So they take these kind of real world settings and historical moments, like for example, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly takes place on a Civil War backdrop. Obviously, this movie, Once Upon a Time in America, takes place kind of around the Prohibition era gangster world of New York. But he elevates them to these levels of myth. Like he eschews realism. Like the movies don't feel real. They feel like heightened and operatic. There's something very like mythical about them. And there's very few filmmakers, I feel like, that have really done something quite like that. And this is going to sound hilarious, Connor, but okay. I think the closest analog I can think of to Leone in like more, I guess, relevant pop culture to most people is actually George Lucas.
Okay.
Or I should specifically say the George Lucas that made Star Wars, the 1977 hit film, now known as Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. Just for my money, when I was in high school, I used to say Star Wars was my favorite movie, right? And I always felt like there was something kind of special about Star Wars that none of the sequels to it ever really had. And I later learned that what it had was a whole lot of Sergio Leone DNA, as well as a lot of Akira Kurosawa DNA, who we'll also talk about in a second. It's obviously really well known the Star Wars initial scripts were retellings of Kurosawa's The Hidden Fortress, right? But it was also really important that George Lucas screened Once Upon a Time in the West for the crew, which was relatively new at that time, because that movie came out in like the early 70s, and Star Wars was in development around that time, and he insisted that he wanted to make a movie exactly like that, like similar kind of feeling, right? And just as an interesting aside, Leone himself was heavily influenced by Kurosawa as well.
Yeah, fact, I was just gonna say, right. There's parallels all here. Yeah. There's almost like a weird triangle thing.
Yeah, there is. There absolutely is. I mean, so like just in case you're not aware, Sergio Leone was very famously sued for his first movie, A Fistful of Dollars, by Kurosawa, because it was basically a retelling of Kurosawa's Yojimbo. Very clearly, it was. There's a really funny story where during the making of that movie, he got a letter from Kurosawa that said, like, I've seen your movie. It is a fine movie, but it's my movie, and I'm suing you. And Leone would parade around with that letter saying, "Oh my God, this master of Japanese cinema said my movie was good." It's an incredible story. But the point is, like, Leone's DNA can be felt everywhere. And the interesting kind of triangle there between, like, George Lucas, Kurosawa, and Leone was something that I think really, like, there's no surprise to me why Star Wars became so huge, because I really do feel like it's kind of those guys like Kurosawa and Leone, the things that they did in their movies that really like demonstrate just the absolute power of filmmaking and what you can do with it. But the interesting thing is that after Star Wars, the lesson that was learned is like, we have to make fairy tales, but we kind of lost the whole for adults part. And now the movie industry is basically just kind of, making fairy tales for children and all ages. But we don't really have any of those fairy tales for adults anymore, which is why I really feel like Leone's movies are so special and why they're still worth seeking out, because there's really nothing like them anymore, and there's definitely nothing to me that hits as hard emotionally and just for a regular like cinema filmmaking experience. So that's kind of my background on Leone.
Yeah, I'd say that there's no doubt about that.
Yeah, for sure. So to get back to Once Upon a Time in America, which is the movie that we just watched. So all of Leone's movies are epics, right? They're movies that are in kind of the tradition of like David Lean and filmmakers like that they're making epic films. And I think Once Upon a Time in America is probably the most epic film he ever made. We're talking a movie that is nearly 4 hours long. And it's more if you're watching the recent extended cut where they found some lost footage that Leone had always wanted to incorporate into the film. So they were able to incorporate that back. So we're talking a movie that, depending on which version you watch, it's either going to be, just under 4 hours or just over 4 hours.
Right. And that's when we watched.
Yeah, we actually watched the extended cut because I had never seen it. And that was kind of an interesting experience in its own right. But I digress. The point being, the movie chronicles the life of its protagonist, David Aronson, who is most known by his nickname Noodles. We follow him through 3 distinct chapters in his life. So first, his childhood in a poor Jewish neighborhood in the Lower East Side of Manhattan in 1918, his adulthood as a Prohibition-era gangster in 1933, and as an old man returning to his hometown in 1968 after receiving a mysterious letter that summoned him back. So the movie is non-linear. It jumps around from these time periods kind of at will, in whatever way is kind of appropriate to the narrative. And out of curiosity, kind of, at least for my money, I think the movie is like an absolute masterpiece of non-chronological editing. I think like the transitions between time periods in this movie are some of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life.
Oh yeah, it's perfect, and just the way it's done and also done with music and with the shots too. Like it'll be a focus on a certain shot, and then it'll just, next thing you know, you'll be back in time or in the future or something, but it'll be so seamless that you won't almost won't even see it, but you'll be immediately there. There's also like it's not explained. Like there's no like title card or something that's telling you when it's transitioning to a different time period or
it doesn't do the
phase.
lost sound,
no,
we're in the past. No.
Nothing like that. No.
Everything is very organic, and it's done in such a way that it almost feels like, again, like you mentioned, the music. I feel like that's such an important element, and I kind of want to talk about the music a little bit more thoroughly as we go along. But there's this kind of rhythmic quality to it where you almost anticipate the time jump before it happens, because it feels like the right thing to do in that moment. So that you're never like stuck wondering like what time period you're in or what's going on, because of just how seamless it is. And it's truly masterful.
Right, and on top of that, the other reason why is because the way that they are able to transport you to the certain time in New York City is unbelievable. The work that they did for the sets, the costume, just everything about it is just unreal. That they were able to just do this kind of thing at this scale.
Yeah.
Just because there's a lot of like places that in this film that I've been to also, and just like, because it's like a lot of it takes place Lower East Side Manhattan and in Brooklyn, and you can see these places and just go, wow, this was this shot in 1910? Like it's that good. It really is.
Yeah, the period detail is unbelievable. Talking about this movie just. It's something special, Connor. It really is.
Yeah, it's almost like where do you begin? It's almost every aspect of it that you can go to.
So since I mentioned it a second ago, I want to talk about music for a second. So you mentioned early on, Connor, that the great composer Ennio Morricone is responsible for all of the music in all of Leone's movies. Ennio Morricone is definitely my favorite film composer. I don't think there's ever been a composer whose work is more perfectly suited to the films that are being made. And again, like people will talk about like John Williams, for example. But I think a lot of the power that John Williams scores have actually comes from, again, we're talking Star Wars was very heavily influenced by Once Upon a Time in the West. The way that music is used in Star Wars is very similar to how music is used in Sergio Leone movies. But I feel like Leone movies are really like the top of just this kind of marriage between music and filmmaking. So one of the things that Leone would always say is that music, like I think he would just say that movies are like 60-40, like 60% images and 40% music. And he would say that music is often way more important than dialogue. And that's something that has always really resonated with me, especially not just as a person who likes movies, but as a musician. Like I've always really, really loved music, obviously, but this kind of approach to filmmaking, he approaches filmmaking similarly to how a musician approaches like song structure, and his scenes almost feel like musical in that sense, and that's something that has always really resonated with me. Like you can really see like in movies like Once Upon a Time in the West, like that movie has like my favorite dialogue ever in any movie, but I think like I'm not sure the exact like statistic, but I think it's one of the shortest screenplays for a movie that's like 3 hours long, because there's very like all of the dialogue is very, very sparse, but it's integrated in such a way that it feels musical. Like one thing that I think like a lot of filmmakers will edit movies to music, right? You'll see like montage scenes and stuff that are always like really popular, and scenes that are always really make an impact, especially today. I always think of like Better Call Saul's like montages. Everybody always talks about them as like incredible scenes and everything. Yes. And that is great, right? But I think something that Leone would do is he would edit just like standard dialogue scenes to music, right? So it would give them this very strange ethereal quality where it doesn't feel realistic. Like it doesn't necessarily feel like conversations that people would have, and they don't say things that sound like normal conversations, but because of the music and the way that the emotions of the dialogue crescendo with the emotions of the music, it gives it this incredibly operatic quality. There's something just unbelievably powerful about it. And the other thing that makes Leone movies so unique, and one of the reasons that they're so long, like I think all of Leone's movies are over 2 hours, and by the time he was finished, like obviously, we mentioned Once Upon a Time in America is like 4 hours long. Right. One of the reasons for that is that Leone didn't want to cut any music short, because Ennio Morricone would write these incredibly like majestic musical scores that have these peaks and valleys and like of emotional response, and he would want to edit his movies to go along with that feeling. So he would never cut any of Leone's cues short. He would let them play the entire time and make sure that all of the scenes that are being used with that music would follow the same trajectory and come to a head with the end of the music, right? So every single scene feels like a musical piece, like a musical statement. And it's something that it's unlike anything I've ever seen in movies because of how unique that is. Like the only other filmmaker I've ever heard compare movies to music is David Lynch.
Yeah,
interestingly,
I mean, what a coincidence that he's another one of our favorites.
Exactly. I feel like there's this. It was really watching Leone's movies that I think kind of showed me what I really value in film and what really resonates with me, because I can see it in all the movies that mean the most to me and that have really like spoken to me the most. It is that musical quality. It's that quality of it really feels like magic. It feels dreamlike. It just lures you in. I mean, like these Leone movies are 3 hours, 4 hours, 2.5 hours long, but they feel like minutes because
they go by so quick. This one went by so quick.
Along, like you're just following along with the rhythms and the feelings. Like it's incredible. Like, and that's why it's such a hard sell to get people to watch movies that are long. But I don't know how to tell people where it's like, man, if you just like let it do what it's doing, it's not gonna feel long. It's just gonna wash over you.
We'll get into that maybe a little bit, but so it's just funny because that's such a difference than the way movies are done now. Obviously, there's tremendous differences from then, but just on the music alone, a lot of films nowadays will put in like filler music. Like they'll
Yeah.
do the scene and then they'll say, "All right, we want something that sounds like this song," and they'll might
Yeah.
even put in a song from a different movie in there, and they'll be like, "We'll just do it in post." Like that it's
Yeah.
almost done in post. Like I think back to, I don't know, it's almost like blasphemous to bring up like one of those DC comic book movies, but like they trashed like the original soundtrack and brought in like a different composer like right at the end to just do it. Like it was almost like not like they did the whole movie and then they bring in a new composer right at the end. I can't even, who was it that they brought in? Whatever, it doesn't even matter.
I'm pretty sure it was like in Batman. No, it wasn't. It was Justice League. I think Danny Elfman eventually did the
that's
score,
right.
but
Yeah,
it was like
right.
a week before like the movie came out.
Exactly. They're just like, you know what, we need something. Let's just throw him in there. And he's like, all right. I mean, it's a job. So like he did it. But like that's a completely different thing than actually working in collaboration with an actual composer.
Oh
that
yeah,
has
that's
everything to do with like what the film is going to be. You know?
yeah, that's one of the like the really special thing between Leone and Morricone was that after I think the first movie, Leone told Morricone to write the music before the movie was even shot. Like because like typically the standard production workflow is that you make your movie and then you bring in the composer, and then the composer will look at the movie and look at the temp music that you've put in and try to make something that fits that, right?
Exactly.
What,
which is
what,
not the
what Leone would do is as somebody that really thought music was just an unbelievably integral part of filmmaking, he would have Morricone write the score first, and then he would even play the score on set for the actors while they were filming scenes so that they could get the rhythms right, so that it would feel like what the movie was going to feel like on the set. There was this very like direct connection between Leone and Morricone that was making sure that the movie was musical. It wasn't just something where the movie was shot and then they had to put in music to fit whatever the emotions of the scene. No, the emotions of the scene were decided by the music in a sense.
Right.
And it was just wonderful just like thing where everything was happening at once. It wasn't like segmented.
And just to bring it back to the film now, like Once Upon a Time in America, the score itself has this melancholy sense throughout the whole thing that it definitely just changes. It affects the way you get the feeling that you get watching the whole thing, the experience, because a lot of the film is an old time gangster who's looking back at his life and his past regret, a lot of it. So the score kind of it seeps through that. You can feel that. You can feel all of it, and it affects the way you're looking back at these scenes also. It's an incredible thing. I said it before early on, the emotional swings that this takes you through is unlike anything that you'll experience. So you'll go from like the melancholy to excitement of watching the kids, like when they're children growing up, to being uncomfortable with what they're doing, to being happy that they work together, to like utter shock, then thrilling excitement, to just to the point where after that, where you think there's no way you could possibly be irredeemed, and then it just distorted to just like crazy degrees, and then you have so much left to go, and then you see what else could be done with it. It's a very challenging film. I'll tell you that. It's something, it respects the audience too, I think. If someone who watches this is you really get you're really in a place for this. This is what the genre was meant to be. This is what film was supposed to be. And it is long, we know it's long. It's 4 hours, it's 4.5 hours. But and people will say, "Oh, it's long. I'm not going to watch something that's this long." But those same people will then be watching 8 hours of a season of television in a day. It's just like amazing to me, that like the dichotomy of it. And I know it's because the people how can you be on your cell phone when you're just playing around on it while watching something? If you're just passively listening to the dialogue, you don't need to see the scenes. This, you need to see everything. The shot composition is ridiculously good. It's unlike anything else.
It's one of those weird things about like the modern era. So I think like as we wrap this up, Connor, I think it's important to say that Once Upon a Time in America is definitely not for everybody.
No, it certainly isn't. But
that's just beyond the movie's length. Like obviously a movie's long, but there, like you said, it's a very challenging movie, and it goes to some places that I don't think that very few movies go to some of the places that this one goes to. And this probably includes the most horrific scene of on-screen violence I think there's ever been. Just traumatizing in a way. But the important thing is that it's just the total package, and it doesn't leave you like you've come away from this feeling like you've seen something major, and it sticks with you, and it's something that sits in your brain for a long time and will resonate like for forever. But beyond that, it's just the experience itself, like it absolutely just draws you in for the whole time. It's something that just picks you up and never lets go until the movie's over. Now, if you have to watch it in shifts, that is possible because there is an intermission midway through. So if you have to watch it in 2 parts, you could do it that way. But the important thing is that you can't engage with it passively, or else it will not work, right? No. Like, I think that a lot of things today are designed with the expectation that people are not going to be paying attention to the entire thing. They're going to be watching with one part of their brain, and then on their phone with the other part of their brain, or cooking dinner, or doing whatever. It's basically like movies have become television, because that's what television always was. And I feel like everything is designed that way now, because there's this expectation that people might not even be watching in a theater. They might be watching on their phone. They might be watching like on the bus. They might be watching on the way to work, right? So people are trying to make things for the purpose of working in any kind of environment with not completely 100% attention. But the thing to remember is that movies didn't used to be designed that way, and didn't have to be, because when a movie like this came out in 1984, and even before that, because really Leone came up watching movies from like the 50s and the 40s and the 30s, and then started making movies in the 60s. So his experience of film is that the only place to see a movie is in a movie theater, right? So the expectation was that no matter what, the film experience was only going to be one thing. It was going to be people in a theater watching this movie for the duration of the time on a giant screen. So movies were able to be made with that in mind, and with the understanding that they would have people's undivided attention. So whenever you're watching like an old movie like this, you have to recognize that that's the mindset that this movie was made in, and it's the mindset you have to try to get yourself to be into. And if you do, it's just unlike anything that you could ever experience. And it's something that I always try to advocate for, because the emotional experience you get from watching something like this is really, really beautiful. And I feel like it's not only is it a lost art, but it's something that not that many people, I don't think they've really experienced it, just because of how dated the concept is, because of how standard it is now to watch movies and television or whatever in formats other than the movie theater. So my recommendation would be that if you're interested in watching a movie like this, or one of Leone's other movies, all of them are amazing, like really try to recreate that movie experience as much as possible. Put your phone away, put it somewhere in another room, turn the lights out, biggest screen possible that you have in your house, and just engage with the thing for the entire duration of it. And if you're anything like me, the experience will be, in a sense, like, I don't want to say life-changing. That might be a little bit too dramatic, but when I get really passionate when I talk about this, because it's something that really means something to me.
I think life-changing is fair. I'll make sure the volume is up too. Don't have the captions on there, and the captions are want to see the full thing. It's
absolutely.
I think it's well said. I'll tell you that it was that I didn't think I really understood like film until I saw a Sergio Leone movie in the theater. Remember when we did that maybe 8 years ago, 10 years ago? I don't know how.
The ugly.
And then I was like, oh man, there's a different thing here. there's something else. And then your horizons broaden. That's for sure.
Thank you so much for listening. We will probably be back next week with some more takes on some of our favorites and classics. And hopefully we can inspire you guys to check out some of the greats, because let me tell you, man, there's nothing like it in the world.